So I'm going to talk a little bit about agriculture and how we're going to feed 9 billion people by 2050. It's a big topic. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, and I've not done this presentation before, so bear with me. But first, 60 seconds about myself, and I need someone to change the slides for me. So. Okay, so I was born here. I was born in London. I grew up here in Switzerland, and I love all things about the mountains. Next slide. It's going to go fast. I went to Durham University in the UK. I studied history and politics, but I decided I should try and do something impactful in the world. So I went off to work. Next slide. As a diplomat, and for the UK, I worked for the Department for International Development, which is an aid ministry. And but I decided the aid industry wasn't for me, and I wanted to find business models to solve big problems. So I went to business school. Hold on, that's not the right picture. Next one. Oh, and that's what we did at business school. We learned a lot of important stuff. After business school, I went off, next slide, to work for Syngenta. It's a global agriculture company. And I learned a ton more about watermelons than I'd ever want to know. I can talk to you about that if you want. And 18 months ago, I started a company with a friend of mine called Yield Pop, which I've been working on for the last 18 months. Okay, so what I want to do today is talk about the challenge of feeding 9 billion people by 2050, and this really breaks down into three things. The first is, hold on a second, the first is demand. So how do we meet demand? The second is how do we do so sustainably in a way which doesn't damage the environment? And the third is really about how we do so nutritiously in a way which doesn't damage people's health. So the first one is demand. Next slide. So we have to feed 9 billion people by 2050. That's 2 billion more than today. Next slide. What does this mean for demand? And I promise you charts are only going to be in the first bit of the presentation. So basically, we're somewhere around here. And this is demand that the FAO estimates for grain, for foodstuffs to 2025. And if you think about it and you expand it out, so in the next 20, 30, 40 years, we have to produce 70% more grain. So where does this grain go? Why do we have to produce more? Well, quite simply put, it's feed for animals. 60% of that demand is going to go to feed animals that we all want to eat. And that's because in countries like Brazil, China, India, Mexico, people are getting richer and they're changing their diets to shift away from mainly vegetable-based diets to meat-based diets. 30% of the demand will have to go to food, just producing more bread, etc. And despite all the controversy about biofuels, growing corn for put into your car, it's actually a very small part of the total picture. So 70% more food. How do we do that? There's really only two ways of doing it. One way is to really put more land into production. So you say, we just need more land and we're going to actually grow more crops. Or the other way is really yield, which basically means the amount of crop you get out of every piece of land. So on the land side, it turns out that there really isn't a lot more land. The only country that really has more land is Brazil, and they've been expanding for the last 20, 30 years, but there's a limit to how much more land they can put in production. In fact, as cities grow in places like Asia, you're actually getting less land. The land is actually coming out of the system. So it really only leaves us with yield. So this is what crop yields have done since 1960. And it looks pretty good, right? It's like a nice green line, it's going up. We've got about 3 times more crop per acre than we had 50 years ago. Everything seems good. And well, actually, put a different way, it's actually not so good. So this is basically the change in yield, how much growth we get per year over the same period. And you see that we're just falling like this, right? We go from a pretty nice 3% and we're down at about 1%. And if you look at where we are now, yield is pretty much only growing enough to basically meet a small increase in demand, and if it falls further, we're going to basically not have enough yield to feed people. But actually, the story is really of two types of farmers. There's big industrial farmers that you find in Europe and US, and then we have other types of farmers, smallholders, we find in places like Africa and Asia. The top line is what US corn yields have been doing since 1960, and you see as they introduce hybrid seeds, we go up, then synthetic fertilizers, they move up. In the 1990s, we introduced GMOs, they go up again, and in 2000s, we get precision technologies for the tractors, and we see another increase in yield. So they're steadily climbing as they put more technology in the field. And the white line is Brazil. They're pretty much the same as Kenya. This is the orange line. They're pretty much the same until 1990. What happens then? Brazil says, oh, well, we're going to start investing in agriculture extension, in more technologies, and you see yields increase. So really what I'm saying is that if we want to meet this big problem of how do we grow more food, the simplest way is not to try and double US corn yields, which is going to cost a lot of money. The real answer is to say, well, we've got all these guys sitting out in Kenya and in Bangladesh and in India, and they really are not doing much with the land that they have. They're just kind of subsistence farmers. So how do we get those guys to increase their yield 5 times? By putting more technology, by putting more investment into the field. And I could spend all morning talking about that, but I want to talk about the 2 other challenges that we face. So sustainability is really a really important topic, because as we've done this big increase in demand, we've basically started to destroy the environment. And it's no secret that there are huge challenges. If you want to understand where yield comes from, you have to understand these 3 factors. And essentially, farming is just a system where you put these 3 things together and you get a result. So the first one is the environment, which is basically what is your soil and your rainfall. It's not something a farmer can do a huge amount about. But he really has a lot of control over technology and practices. Technology being, what fertilizer do you use, what seeds do you use, practices being how you set up your system. And if you think about a plant really grows from these 4 inputs, and I want to take each one in turn. So if we start with light and temperature, this is an important one, and climate change, I always say climate change is a bit like religion, right? I can't prove to you that climate change is going to ruin the planet, and you can't prove to me that it won't ruin the planet. But there's a high probability that it's going to be bad. Let's just assume for a moment that it's going to be bad. So what are we going to see in terms of growing food? Well, the biggest problem is going to be increased heat is going to create more pressure for diseases and pests. We're going to see more things like this, crop failure. We're going to see more extreme weather, floods, droughts. So basically the farmer's got a lot of uncertainty. The second one is water, and here there are really 2 issues. One is quality, the other is quantity. So the whole planet, there's only 3% of fresh water on this planet, right? 97% of water on Earth is salt water. You can't use that for crops. You can't use that to drink. And of that 3%, 70% of it is used for agriculture, right? So forget about industry and everybody else. Farming is by far and away the biggest user of water, fresh water in this planet. Now, one of the problems is that 1/3 of the population lives in China and India, and they only have 10% of the world's fresh water. So we have all these problems where water is in the wrong places. We're growing crops in places where we shouldn't grow anything, because it just doesn't make any sense to pump water out of the ground to try and grow a very thirsty crop like rice, which is what they do in India or in China. So we have to figure out a system to get crops grown in the most effective places with the best technologies. And as you get more salinity in the soil and acid rain, yields go down. So water is a problem. The final one is nutrients. So this is basically just about soil health. And as we've gone into a very intensive system, like I was explaining to you, with more fertilizers, with more machinery, we've really damaged soil in a large way, on a large scale. It's the most important environmental problem from agriculture, and nobody talks about it, right? Everybody talks about GMOs. Nobody talks about soil health. And it takes 500 years to replace this amount of soil, 500 years, if once it's washed away. So we need to preserve what we have, and we need more biodiversity, we need better practices, better rotations, more sustainable tillage. Now some of you are probably thinking, organic. Organic is the answer. To how many people does this look like an organic farm? Anybody? Okay, we got 1, 2. Well, I can tell you this is 100% organic. This is a farm I visited in California. It's a lettuce farmer. He has around 1,000 hectares like this, monocropped. And really what he's done is he said it's Earthbound Farms. They produce 2/3 of the US's bagged salad. You go to the Migros and you buy your salad in a bag. That's where it comes from. And what they've done is they've said, okay, well, synthetic fertilizers, instead of using synthetic fertilizers, we use chicken manure, we use compost, we truck it in, we put it on the field. We don't use herbicides anymore to kill the weeds. We put a tractor through the farm, a field 6 times a season, and we kill the weeds. And then we actually have some nice Mexican guys who come through and pick out the rest by hand. So it looks very clean, right? You don't see any weeds in this field. And then they have insect problems, of course. So what do? Well, they have what we call biological controls. That's other small insects that eat the insects. So all they've done really is substitute one input for another. This is still an intensive farm. And when they finish and they pick it, it goes into a truck and it gets shipped all the way to New York, 3,000 miles away. So is that really more sustainable? I don't know. But I think that we can spend all day being nostalgic about how food should be grown in a beautiful little farm with a couple of cows. But in the end, we need to think about how to make these systems more sustainable. And that really takes me on to the final point, which is nutrition. So nutrition, we could do it, if we could produce more food, great. If we can do it more sustainably, great. But in the end, if we do it and it's not healthy, then what's the point, right? And nutrition is really this actually comes into 2 parts. So in one part of the world, we have hunger, right? 900 million people will go to bed hungry tonight. 900 million, that's a huge number, right? This is a kid from Somalia. I stole this off the World Food Program website. This is not something that's uncommon. And this is not about total amount of food that's available. This is about access to food. This kid just can't get access to the food he needs. And why can't he? Because he doesn't have enough money. Go back.
Sorry?
He doesn't have enough money. He doesn't have enough safety nets in case his family, maybe his mother's sick, now he can't eat. And in the end, why are we producing, we have this problem where we're producing food in Russia. Russia says, I'm going to not export any wheat because we want wheat, and then the Egyptians go on riot because there's no bread. We have to have a free system of trade where we can move food around. And now we go to the other side of the coin, right? Obesity. And there should be no doubts, this is a huge health epidemic. This is a crisis that's going to really kill our health systems in many countries, and not just the US, where 30% of people are obese. We see it in emerging markets now, in Mexico, in India, and China. We see it all over Europe, Italy, UK. And this is about access to food. We produce food too cheaply. We give people cheap calories that are not healthy. And it's very easy to blame the food system, right? It's very easy to blame the food system, but the food system gives us what we ask for, and we've asked for cheap calories. So I want to just really leave with 4 questions. So, do you know where your food comes from? And by this I don't mean, I bought it at the Migros. I don't mean aus der Region. Do you know what the farm was that produced your food? Do you know how they produced your food? Did you even think about that in the last month? Are you a vegetarian? Or better still, how many of you are vegans? We got 1 vegan.
I've started.
It's
a test.
It's not a test. It's just to make people think. And I think, going back to the thought about where's that demand going to come from? It's going to come from trying to grow food to feed animals, right? It takes 7 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of beef.
How about pasteurized?
Sorry?
How about pasteurized?
Pasteurized?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is definitely something. Grass-fed beef is definitely a big improvement, but we can't produce as much beef on pastures, it's just in terms of efficiency. So unless people want to eat less meat, it's not sustainable either. So that's just a question. Next one. When did you last eat processed food? So, you know, a lot of food that we eat is not natural anymore, right? When did you last eat a Twix? Who drank a beer last night? This is stuff that is produced by our system, food system. And the last one, do you cook at home regularly? And I think probably for you guys this is not so much of an issue, but in many countries there's no food culture anymore. People have forgotten how to eat. They put food in the microwave, they watch TV, they eat in their car. And this is a part of the reason why people don't eat healthily anymore. But the good news is that, next slide, is that you can solve this problem. And you're probably getting sick of seeing my face everywhere on Facebook. But anyway, here I am. We can solve this problem pretty easily, and it's really about how you spend your money. It's how you choose to spend your money every day. And it's using what I call the buy, eat, cook system. So buy food, buy local, and find out where it comes from, how they produce your food. Buy seasonal, you know, no point buying strawberries in January. And buy from a sustainable farm. We can talk about what that is if you want. Eat, this I think is, you know, it's a pretty simple rule, but it's whole foods, so, you know, don't eat all the refined processed foods. Eat foods which are essentially plant-based. Majority, you know, eat some meat if you want. I'm not against meat at all. But I think that people consume far too much cheap meat that really is not good for the world. And cook, you know, cook regularly at home and create that sort of food culture. And I think if people really change the way that we buy food, then the system will respond, right? And that's part of what's going to drive the changes in agriculture to make it more sustainable. So that's all I wanted to say today. It's covered a lot of things, and I'll take your questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Anybody has any questions?
Yeah. How do you feel about gen technology?
GMOs?
GMOs,
Yeah.
yes. I'm not very much in favor of it, but I'm wondering what you think.
So GMOs, there's a lot of controversy about it. People get very excited. I think it's a huge distraction from the real problems that we face in agriculture. You know, agriculture is anything but natural, actually, for thousands of years. What farmers do, it's about, you know, taking a piece of land and trying to grow as much as they can from it, and it's not that's not something that occurs naturally, right? But GMOs, I think there's some good things and there's some bad things. The good things is that, you know, if you have a corn plant that is now resistant to insects, so when the insect eats the plant, it dies, you don't have to spray the field with chemicals anymore, right? So is it better, is it worse? I don't know, it's a trade-off. And I think we should be open to using it in our toolkit of how to solve this challenge. And we shouldn't just say it's bad because it's not natural, which I think there's many things which are much worse that we just turn around a blind eye to. So, you know, using fertilizer is a good example. Every year there's an enormous runoff from the fields across the Midwest US where they put a lot of fertilizer that gets washed into the river. And you have this enormous algae bloom, 100 square miles, that kills all the fish, everything in the area. But no one says anything about that. They don't care. They go out and tear up plants and protest because of GMOs. For me, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the growing rice in other countries where they put some vitamins from corn in it, and that sort of thing, that can also hurt the economy of that place. I mean, in America that might not be a problem, but if the farmers have to buy these expensive seeds or whatever, that can also be a problem. But, well, I'm not sure where it's going.
Yeah, I mean, farmers tend to buy high quality seeds because they get a better yield, and they're not forced to buy those seeds as such, right? Especially in Asia where rice is a lot of rice breeding is government backed. You know, the governments are giving away seed to farmers because it's food security. So there's a lot of choice for them. They buy from the companies because they can get a better yield, largely.
So how exactly do you or does your company help to solve these problems? or at least tell them?
So what we do is provide agronomic advice to farmers, and we started out with one decision that he makes in the farm, which is which seed should I select. So it's kind of like Expedia for seeds. Basically what you do is you say, I'm in this location, I am growing this crop, I have these technologies I'm looking for, and then we have a big database of field trials which shows performance of the product, and we make a recommendation to him as to what he should plant.
And do you give advice like worldwide, or?
At the moment we're only working in the US for corn and soybean farmers. Yeah. But yeah, I mean every farmer is growing seeds all over the place. So yeah, the vision is to be everywhere and to expand throughout the season, because a lot of farmers are not necessarily sure what's the next thing I should do. And so what we will aim to do is to kind of be with him as he grows his crop to help him improve performance on his farm.
Would you have any recommendation what we could do locally here, Zurich? You live in Zurich, don't you?
Yeah.
There you go. So what we could do here?
So I mean, I think that if you really want to have more sustainable system, you have to support your local food economy and stimulate demand. You know, and you're close to some pretty good farms around here. Buy direct if you can. There are companies that run box schemes, you know, where you buy every week, you get a box delivered to your house. If that's too much hassle, go to the markets, sell that to Platts Tuesday and Friday. You know, you support the local food economy, and you know, it takes time and it takes effort to understand where your food comes from. But I think that's the single biggest thing you can do, is to really understand where your food comes from and demand good quality, because you know, at the moment there's no differentiation between high quality produce. I mean, there is a little bit, but generally speaking, most produce is mass market. And so if you can spend money on high quality produce, then I think you'll create the demand locally.
What about the third world farmers? They are forced to leave their lands because they have to sell their crops really cheap, and they have to sell their lands to these huge companies that they produce massively with lots of chemicals. Is there a way that your company will get to these people to keep their tradition of doing organic crops? Because it's not like it's a trend for them. It's like they've been doing this for their whole life. Yeah. But they're leaving to the cities and leaving their crops to this huge farmer enterprises.
Yeah, I mean, a large reason why people leave the land is because they have better opportunities to work in the city, right? I mean, there's nothing that we can do anything about. That's just the way economic growth works. But I think you know, we're technology agnostic. So we don't care if you grow a GMO crop or if you grow an organic crop. We provide data on all crops. So yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we wouldn't have something for that guy. I think the biggest challenge for those farmers, you know, is to create a system that is really sustainable, allows them to live in a way which will keep them on the farm, because the opportunities are clearly much better in the cities. That's why people leave, and you know, it's just part of development as well. So I think that, like I said, I think we could be nostalgic about how farming should be, or we could say, well, we have a system which is producing food, we need to make it more sustainable. And I think the latter is worth spending time on, rather than saying, I want to keep those people where they are. They should be free to move if they have better opportunities, right?
As far as I'm informed, in the United States, there's a law that they have to put 10% around ethanol to their gasoline. Yeah. And they're not even able to achieve this amount with the local agriculture, so they have to buy it from Brazil. And as well as we know that the States is a gasoline-based mobility system. Yeah. What do you think these kind of laws, like putting corn to achieve mobility, will this increase in the next year, or?
Clearly, this is crazy. I mean, we should not be doing this. This is just distorting the system. And they have a lot of very powerful people who lobby, from farmers who lobby Congress, and so they have these rules. I think over time it's going to go away because, first of all, places like Brazil can do it much more cheaply than places like the US. But over time, you're going to see move into second generation biofuels, where they're using more marginal land to produce ethanol from grasses and things like this. And people will just say, well, the corn subsidy doesn't make any sense. And especially as the budget comes under a lot of pressure, then people will lobby to get rid of it. And already you're seeing them starting to lift the mandates on imports. And so that means that they won't be able to compete against the Brazilians either. So I think it's just politics. It's bad politics. We should get rid of it.
We know from studies that nutrient-rich foods are also less satisfying when people just eat more because they eat shitty food. So should there be, for example, taxes or laws on advertising fast food as we have on alcohol and tobacco? Because it's just it's the same amount of destroying our health. So should there be laws that make us eat more real food and therefore also consume less grain and less starchy products?
I mean, I generally think that sometimes regulation is not always the best thing, but I think I actually agree with you. I think that food will go the way of tobacco and alcohol because people are not able to really control what they eat, And in a way, it's evolution, right? Our bodies are programmed to eat as much fat, as much salt, and as much sugar as possible because we don't know when our next meal is coming, right? That's what we did for thousands of years. And essentially, we can do that 3 times a day, 4 times a day, as many calories as you want very cheaply, so that's what people do. And I think that, unfortunately, the food industry, there's absolutely nothing natural about a pack of cornflakes, right? I mean, what goes into that on any given day can change depending on commodity prices. One day they put corn, the next day they put some oats, the next day they put something else, and it's all still cornflakes and it tastes the same. But it's not necessarily healthy for you. So I think it's going to be more regulation. They have to because the cost to the health system is huge. People have diabetes, heart attacks, cancer, and so it's got to change. The system is making people sick.
Now do we want governments to get an interest in that? Because, for example, in America, where it's just people have to pay their health costs themselves. It's just a huge industry, and it's in the interest of the government as well to have high costs there in a way that people just spend all their money on health because they didn't spend enough on food.
Yeah, and it's crazy because they'll spend 10 times more on drugs than they do on food, and this makes no sense. But ultimately, I think the governments just won't be able to afford the costs, so they will start to change. I just think it's going to come down to being a financial issue for society, and then the system will have to change. But right now, they have so much power in terms of keeping the rules as loose as possible, and and it's all down to this freedom of choice and. And what you're seeing, and unfortunately it's kind of a question of education too, right? You have this sort of one part of the population that's wealthy, they're basically all into super organic and natural and local and going to the gym and yoga and all that stuff, and then the other part of the population really has no choice. I don't know, I've been and spent a lot of time in Illinois and Iowa and rural places, and you drive down a road which is just a strip mall, and the only thing you can eat is fast food, right? It's hamburgers, it's big steaks, it's whatever, but if you look for a fresh piece of fruit or vegetables, the only thing you'll find is a banana. That's it. There's literally nothing else, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm really not exaggerating, there's nothing. And that's how the majority of the population, they don't have any choice anymore, because the food is so cheap, they've killed off all the other fresh stuff. And until we make food more expensive, which is sadly what will have to happen, people are just going to have no choice. And that's why I say, it's up to you guys to actually start, it's less of an issue here, but in many other countries, they need to start investing more money in buying healthy food, and then it'll start to re-stimulate demand. So, but I think regulation is inevitable.
Rice is you need a lot of work to make rice grow.
Yeah.
Do you think that things like rice will die out because it's too much work? It's much easier to have wheat or other things? Or do you think it will always be some parts of the world where you will have people to plant the rice?
Yeah, I think rice is here to stay. I mean, 90% of rice is consumed in Asia, obviously. And it's a huge part of their culture and tradition. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. They eat rice 2 or 3 times a day. Well, farmers will get more efficient, but even if you look at a country like Japan, where they're still producing rice, the government has supported them for 50 years. You know, every plot of land is no bigger than this room, and they work the farm by hand, and they pay more for their rice. They're happy to pay more for their rice because the quality is good. And I think this is going to be, there will be less rice farmers than there are today, for sure, but will you still have rice produced in small plots? You know, yes.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.